And we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our September edition. We have some special guests today. But before we go to the guest, we have our panelist, and that's Sander. Hey, Sander. Introduce yourself.
Hi. I'm Sander Elias. I'm an Angular GDE. I do some things on the web.
And you had a good week because you released Scully version 1 officially.
Yes, we officially released Scully version 1. And today I released a plugin that makes it possible to have your CSS that is above the fold inlined in your HTML file.
Wow, nice.
We'll have to start being nicer to you.
Even nicer?
Yeah. Just remember, we knew you before you were famous.
Next to that, we have Bonnie.
Hi.
She's going to give us a grand tour to the Angular Nation part. Looking forward to that.
I'm very excited about the Dutch Angular group. I feel prepared with my app newbies.
Yeah, that's a typical Dutch thing, right?
Typical Dutch.
Typical Dutch.
Ik ben aan het oefenen.
And then we have Minko who's joining us for every questions that are around Angular, basically.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah, let me introduce myself.
And then last but not least.
Oh, sorry. I originally thought that I should.
Oh, it's a bit of a delay. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Minko Gechev. I'm working on Angular at Google.
And then last but not least, it's Emma.
Hi, everyone. I'm also working at Angular at Google.
Well, we're happy to have you both here. And you're going to tell us a lot of things around Angular and I18N. So do you want to share your screen and start with it?
Yeah, let's do this. I18N definitely is a tongue twister too. So let's see how many times I trip up over it. Cool.
Okay, it's good.
Yep. Awesome. Everyone can see my screen.
Yeah,
Cool.
looks good.
Awesome. Let's get started. So like I said, hi, everyone. My name is Emma Twersky, and I'm a member of the Angular team at Google. Pretty new, super excited to be here. And my focus has always been on user experience and the visual side of development. Outside of work, I really love art. I love doodling. If there was such a job as a professional doodler, I definitely would have gone that route. But all my doodles were in computer science and math textbooks. So here I am. And you can see here, I like to doodle the first slide of my presentations. So just some stuff. This is actually from a dinner I had at a restaurant in Amsterdam. So I thought it was fitting for today and Dutch Angular. And today I want to talk about something that impacts everyone's visual ability to navigate websites, and that's language. And more specifically, it's internationalization. And for the purpose of today, we're just going to shorten that to I18N, which is the I and the N from internationalization, and then the 18 very confusing letters in the middle that make it a tongue twister. And what I18N is the translation of text. So being able to use your application in different locales around the world and really having that global audience. And more specifically, I want to talk about and give some insight into Angular's first-party I18N solution and why it's built the way it is. And then in the second half, we'll look at actually how to implement I18N, look at a demo app that I've built and some of the different ways to use I18N, and then sort of wrap up with a sneak peek at some other stuff. So with that said, why I18N? So at Google, we build products to be used globally, and we specifically build Angular to make it easy for developers to achieve that global goal. So Google has over 2,600 Angular projects, and global accessibility is something that we care a lot about, especially if you think about how the world is currently using technology. Communication and that global audience is really important, and so we care a lot about that. And because we care a lot about that, internationalization and localization are available by default in Angular. And it's unique in that we have a really tightly coupled I18N solution. So we're making sure that we have a very convenient, feature-rich global strategy out of the box. And because we are a global community, I just want to shout out that there are some great other third-party solutions like NGX Translate, Transloco, I18N Next, quite a few other packages out there. But today we're just going to focus on the first-party I18N solution and why the integrated solution is often most optimal for quite a few projects. So with that said, let's get started talking about that first half of the design decisions and goals behind it. So to borrow from Minko's tweet, the North Star of our first party solution is to create a zero runtime overhead solution in incredibly small bundles. And the way we're going to do that is with a few different design decision trade-offs. So the first is this pretty standard thing you'll hear about with Angular, which is the static and dynamic trade-off, with Angular choosing to be a bit more of a static language. And that's because we want to set constraints. We want to build in best practices, again, to the developer experience just with that ng-new command, right? And so a lot of this has to do with catching errors earlier, because we know that if we catch errors at build time, that's so much better than potentially deploying an application and having some sort of production bug. And so this is a relatively unusual implementation, especially for I18N compared to some other frameworks. But again, it's all driven by that investment in creating a better end user experience. So again, making sure that the developers have the tools to deliver that global solution in the best way possible. And so the next one, and probably the most talked about thing with I18N, is this compile time runtime trade-off, right? And so I18N in Angular is, or at least recommends, a compile time solution, and that's what's most standard. And the reason we do that is because we know that serving is incredibly cheap, right? So we know that if we're trying to reach users who maybe have a poor internet connection or are part of that next billion user group, we know that we want to be able to do as much as possible at compile time so that at runtime, there's absolutely no impact and the user basically just doesn't see anything related to that translation. And again, that's just because we care about that end user, right? So we want that really smooth experience. And so by doing that, again, with this last trade-off, we have sort of choosing to emphasize the performance and size over maybe something like space, right? So by emphasizing performance, we want to make sure that, again, we have that zero runtime overhead because we have no bindings. There's much fewer template instructions. And at runtime, we're not doing any sort of message extraction. So we're really trying to be as speedy as possible, right? We're trying to run change detection without having any impact on translation or language or anything like that. And then by emphasizing size, we want to make sure that we're producing the smallest possible bundle. So again, no binding extractions. And because we're doing all of this at compile time, we're able to tree shake those translation files. So I know Angular cares a lot about tree shaking. That's definitely a thing that we really like to talk about. But if we have a messages file, let's say we've sent all of the messages that are translated to a translator and have these massive message files of all of our translations, but we only actually end up using a quarter of them, we know that at compile time and we can tree shake all of that unused information. So we're not actually serving that to the user. And so with that said, I want to sort of just dive quickly into the pipeline of what's actually happening in the CLI with I18N. To sort of look at some of the changes that landed with V9 that you're getting out of the box. So you start with I18N, that attribute in your templates, and then you also have this thing called $localize that was introduced in V9 that you can use in your code. And that's what we're going to focus on when we sort of look at the second half of this presentation, which is how to actually implement these things. We'll be coming back to the templates and code. But next, we're going to throw both of those things into the compiler and NGC. We'll webpack them and we'll minify them. And the reason that I have $localize on all of these pipeline rectangles, so to speak, is because anything that has that I18N in a template is actually going to compile into a $localize function. And then that function's going to persist through Webpack and through minification and remain a function call. And what's really important there is this is the change that was brought so that we could just build one bundle no matter how many languages or locales you're trying to translate into. And then the next step, once we have our minified bundle, is we're going to do something called translation replacing. So we're going to take all of our translation files for however many languages we have. Let's say we have 12 locales, so we have 12 different translation files. We're going to throw them in a translation replacer, which is about 5 seconds. And then anytime we have that $localize call, we're going to swap out the correct translation, and we're going to create that translated production file. So the change here is if we look at what that actually costs time-wise, we're going to build one bundle, which is about 3 minutes of compilation, Webpack, minifying, all that jazz. And then per locale, we're going to do that translation replacer, which is about 5 seconds, like I said. So this whole build time is going to be about 4 minutes. And if we just sort of look at prior to V9 and these changes that landed with this $localize, something that people really talked about in our community was the fact that we had to build a bundle per locale, right? So if that bundle cost 3 minutes and we were doing this in 12 different languages, that was 36 minutes, which is a pretty costly build time. But with $localize, that's now down to about 4 minutes, which if you sort of do the math, is about n times faster. So quite a few cool changes happened there. And if you want to know more about this, Peter Bacon-Darwin, who works on I18N for the Angular team, actually wrote a really great blog post on angular.io if you want to read more about some of these changes that landed. That said, we can basically just circle all of that middle chunk and leave it to the CLI and not worry too much about it. Obviously, it's super interesting, but again, we have this great, super powerful CLI that can do all of that. And the really cool thing is that all of the changes I just talked about shipped transparently. So all you'd need to do is run ng update and add the localized package, and you would get all of that significant improvement in build time without pretty much any overhead to you as a developer. So this was a really great sort of hidden benefit that came to localize and I18N without any cost to you as a developer, which really improved the performance. So I think that's cool. Now, let's move into the second half, which is how do we actually use I18N? So the first thing you're going to do, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, is you're going to ng add localize as a package in your terminal. And this is going to be the one step that you need to do when you update to version 9 and want to bring these sort of localized benefits, is you do need reference to this localized package versus some prior versions. The next thing you're going to do is we have 3 different ways to sort of localize your information. So if you have data, you can just format it with a locale ID. And this is going to be something that you actually don't need the package for. So these are things like currency pipes, date pipes. Again, you'll see them used later, so don't worry too much about this now. But that locale ID is going to be the string that references where you're trying to serve that information to and where that actually is for that user. Next, we're going to have sort of the bulk of the work, which is actually using that I18N attribute in your templates, and something that's a little bit newer and maybe a little bit less familiar, which is using $localize in application code. So this is the #1 most commented on issue and feature request on the repo at Angular, and it's totally possible. So I think that's really cool, and I want people to know about it. And again, we'll talk more about these and actually see what it looks like in a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to run ngx I18N in our terminal, and this is going to be our message extractor. And so this is going to go through and parse. Oops, I have a cat with me. We're going to parse out all of those messages that we're trying to translate in our templates and in our code. There's actually a new feature landing with version 10.1 that is able to extract $localize calls in code. So cutting edge, super cool and brand new. And I learned about it this week. So changes are always coming. And then finally, once we have those extracted messages in our messages file, we're going to want to translate them for each locale. So with a bigger application, maybe that means sending it to a translator or using a translation tool or something like that. We're going to basically copy that messages file and create a different file per locale that we want to be able to deploy this application in. And then finally, once we have those translations, we're able to build and serve those distributable application files with the localized flag. So actually going into our angular.json and setting some configurations and so that we're able to serve these things in different languages. So with that said, I want to sort of run through all of this stuff with a demo application. And since this is Dutch Angular, I figured the sketch on the first slide was a restaurant that my best friend and I had after I finished my thesis presentation that happened to be in Amsterdam. So we're going to sort of play off of that greenhouse theme and build a greenhouse application. And so this is just going to be our basic greenhouse application. For the purpose of today, all we really care about is that we have this header that says information about greenhouses. And then on the left, we have a panel that has our favorite plant, our selected plant, and some more information about it. And then on the right, we just have a list of 3 repeating plants. We can pretend that there's more. We can talk about plants later. I'm not the gardener of my family, but I could answer plant questions, I suppose. And so all of this information is being served from a backend. So we're not actually going to translate any of the information about the plant, but we're going to sort of look at how to localize all of the actual application strings here. So if we sort of look at how that's applied, the first thing we talked about was formatting data with that local or locale ID, right? And so, like I said, these are going to be things like known pipes. So 2 examples I've used here is I have a date. So this today is going to be the variable that I have. And I took this screenshot 2 days ago, so it's actually the 22nd, I guess. And then we're going to have that pipe and then that known keyword date, which is going to be that date here. And then some extra sort of variables that we don't really need to worry about, but we have full, which is the format of the day that I want. So just the full day. I've edited the time zone a little bit just to show what you can do there. And then what's really important here is this FR string. And that's going to be the locale ID that I'm supplying to the application to know that I actually want this date, this known pipe of this variable formatted as a French. FR is the French translation locale ID. So I want it translated for French. Similarly, I have this amount variable, again, this pipe and this known keyword currency. So I know that this amount or this cost is going to be a currency. And then I know I want it translated. Again, this is going to be our locale ID. And this is English, but the New Zealand version of English. So again, just being able to supply this locale ID, and this is coming out of the box. This actually doesn't need localize. So if we just have basic strings like that, some variables that we want to format, we can do that. And if we look at our application, we have a date here that I'm applying that pipe to. And then we also have 2 different dollar amounts. We have $1 and euros. That, again, I'll dive into the code in a second and actually show you what that looks like. The next thing is I18N and templating. So here we're supplying this I18N attribute, and then we have some optional additional information we give. But all we really need to do is put this I18N attribute on any of our HTML elements, and it's going to flag it that we want to extract that message, and we want to actually translate that when we localize our application. In addition, we can also give some more information, and I would just say my recommendation is to always use these things. The more information you're able to supply, the better, especially when you think about building a really large scalable application. If you're taking those messages and extracting them and sending them to someone who's not you, who maybe doesn't know the use case, the more meaning, the more description you're able to give that translator, the better and more accurate those translations are going to be. So words can be really fickle and have completely different meanings in different domains. And I think it's really important that we get the most accurate information, because translations are really important, which is why we're talking about them. So again, we have this meaning, and then we have a description, and then we're able to give an optional ID just so that we're not randomly generating a really long, meaningless amount of strings. So here we have this information about greenhouses. This is going to be the header And it's going to actually be the introduction header to our site. And then I've just given it an idea of introduction header. Next, we have some special type of I18N and templating, and those are ICU expressions. And more specifically, these are international components for Unicode. Just if you want to know what ICU means, I always want to know what acronyms mean. And so an ICU expression is going to be, we have two that localize, it's plurals and selects. And so in this example, we have a plural. And so we have how often we want to water a plant. So now I've tagged it with the I18N attribute. And then this is going to be our ICU expression, everything between these brackets. And so we're taking this variable water, which is how often we want to water our plant. We're saying it's a plural, which is that known keyword for the ICU expression. And then we're equating it to some different things. So if it's 0, if this water variable is 0, we rarely want to water it. If it's 1, we want to water once per week. And then few, many, and other are going to be our keywords for that plural ICU expression, which I'm just saying is every other day, and every variable amount of days where the variable's that water, right? And the really important thing here, and the reason we want to use I18N, is because few and many mean different things in different locales. So for example, in the US, few and many actually don't evaluate to anything. So if we use this like ICU expression in an English translation, we would just have 0, 1, and other because few and many don't have a meaningful interpretation. But let's say we're doing this in a locale where few means 3. Then we want to make sure we're using an accurate representation of what that language actually is looking for there. In comparison, let's say few meant only 15 and more, then we want to make sure, again, it has a meaningful representation to those users so that they're watering their plants correctly, right? So again, just making sure that we localize based on sort of the locale's definition of what maybe these sort of broad or vague things mean in different languages. And here, again, we're just going to see, but it's this variable here, which is saying we're going to water, and it's rarely, because again, this must be 0 for how often we want to water our aloe. The other ICU expression is going to be a select. And this is going to be a little bit more straightforward in my opinion, but everything's arbitrary, right? And so this is going to be where we want to actually put our plant. So this is going to be the location. So again, we have our location, and then the location is going to be the variable there. We have our select, which is the keyword. And then we're going to have 3 options. So let's say this location is indoor, outdoor, or both. You could use this for an enum. I've seen this used for things that are sort of like gender is a very common one, or things like that. And so indoor, we actually want to be indoors because maybe that makes more sense in English to translate it that way. But in other languages, indoors might mean something completely different, right? And indoor isn't the most like lexicologically sensical thing there. And so again, indoors, outdoors, and anywhere are going to be, because we have this I18N attribute, what we get to translate into those different locales. And here we have it just below our water. So we have this location, and this must be a both so that it's anywhere. Finally, we have probably what is the newest to everybody at this meetup, and that's going to be $localizing call in code. And so, like I said, this is the most asked for and most commented on sort of feature request, and it is possible. And so what this is going to look like is it's a tagged template literal that you can use in strings in your application code, so in TypeScript. There are some limitations, so this is supported, but we're still working on documentation. There is some great community guides out there, but it definitely is still represented as a new feature. And like I said, extraction only just landed with version 10.1, and there is a flag. So when you run that message extraction, you want to add the flag Ivy, just to make sure you're getting that. But what this actually looks like is here, I have that favorite plant component, right? And I want to have a special variable. So I want to make sure that in the header, I want to say my favorite plant is whatever plant I've selected. And this is going to be dynamic. So if I want to set that string in the code, then I can create this variable favorite, and I can use this tagged template literal and apply it to this string so that I have dollar localized to this string. And then when I actually go to compile this, again, because all of our templates are actually being created or being compiled into dollar localized calls, this dollar localized call just gets added on to all of our template dollar localized calls and gets treated the same way with all of this internationalization. And this is sort of what it's going to look like. Obviously, there's some broader uses for what you can do here, and you can do some pretty cool things. You can override what the dollar localized function is actually going to look like, all kinds of cool stuff like that. And then finally, again, I've sort of talked about it, but once we run that ngx i18n command in our terminal, we're going to extract those messages, and we're going to then have to create those translations. So what that looks like is you're going to create a messages, that command's going to create a messages file, and then you're going to copy it for each locale. So here I'm creating a Dutch translation, again, specific to the meetup. And so for each translation unit, I'm going to be given a bunch of information. So here I'm showing you what it would look like for that first thing we talked about, that information about greenhouses object. And I'm going to copy the source and then create a target that contains that translation. Now, this is normally actually going to be done by somebody who is bilingual, or maybe use a translation tool to do this with our messages files. But just this is what it's going to end up looking like. And here's the reason I said earlier that you want to add that description in meeting, because when you get to the point of actually creating those translations, and let's say you have 100 in your messages file, you're going to forget what all of those things mean, right? So by having a description and meaning, you're not having to go back and refer to the code and say, okay, where did I actually use that string? Because again, here I was able to supply more information. So just in that one file, without sort of context switching, I could remember what that looks like. And so with that said, I just want to show you what this actually looks like in application code. So can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my terminal or my code editor? Cool. Okay, so let's run through this real quick. So this is going to be our application. And we have our plant object. So I just want to show you what this actually looks like and what we're dealing with. So again, we have that name, a URL, a description, that longer description, and then some information that we're going to care about how often we're watering it, where we're going to place it, and how much it costs. Now, if I go to my app component, I can see that I have an injected variable, and I'm injecting my locale ID. And that's coming from Angular core, and I'm just going to have that as a local variable, or a variable called locale. Now, if I look at my app component, let's first look at those pipes, right? So this is something that I'm not even having to use that i18n attribute for. I'm just sort of formatting. So here I have today, and then I have, again, that pipe. And today is, again, if I just remember in the component, I'm creating a date object with the current date. Then I have this known pipe. So I'm going to say this is a date. I just want the medium date. There's all kinds of date formats. Basically, this is going to be day, month, and year. I'm editing the time zone again, and then I'm applying the locale ID, which is that locale variable, just so that I can format it. And if I go back to my code, I can show you I've served this application and I have my date here. So I have this actual date that I'm selecting. Now, if I toggle the date, and let's say I change it to Dutch, then I can see that I've changed how this date is formatted, because obviously in Europe, there's a much more logical order where it goes day, month, year, right? But if I want to change it once more to Danish, I can see that there is actually some nuance in how I format it differently there. So again, I'm just seeing that applied based on what locale I'm supplying to that pipe. Now, if I go back to my code, I can show you the other pipe that I have implemented, and that's the currency pipe, right? So I have the dollars amount, and I'm just supplying that currency pipe. So I have the cost of my plant, that pipe, and then that known keyword currency. Now here I'm not supplying a locale, so it's just going to take my computer's locale, which is English. So that's going to stay in dollars and stay in English. But I have this other variable, which is euros, where I'm doing the exact same thing at the beginning. I have that cost, that currency pipe, but I'm going to say, I want this in euros. We don't need to worry too much about this, but I'm saying it's a symbol and I'm giving it sort of dollar format. And then again, I'm supplying that same variable, which is that locale. And that's going to tell it how I want to actually format that euro amount based on the locale I'm supplying. So again, if I swap back and I can zoom in a bit and look at, again, we're just looking at here, this euro amount. I can see in Danish, I have that euro following the dollar amount. But if I go back to Dutch, I can see that that euro switches to the beginning. So just again, some nuance of language. I believe if I go to English, there's no space. So again, just supplying that locale variable and seeing how it changes with those pipes. Now, the one thing I do want to say is in order to do these things, if I'm not using localize, let's say I haven't localized this application, then I do actually need to import some data just to make sure that I can use those pipes, right? So I want to use register local data, which is just a common sort of tool. And then I want to import any locales I know I'm going to be applying to date pipes and just register them. That way my application has the knowledge of what those locales look like without having to go further into sort of localization. So if we just wanted to stop here and I hadn't localized this at all, I would need to do this just to make sure that those locales apply to the pipes right. Now, next, I want to show you those I18N tags, right? So if I go back to my app component, and I sort of just look at, again, we've been talking about this header quite a bit, but this is what it's going to actually look like, right? So I have this I18N tag on my H1 element. Again, I've given it all kinds of information here. So the meaning, it's a site header, the description of what it actually means, and then I've given it that custom ID, right? And so then I have this information about greenhouses. So that's going to be how I apply I18N. Similarly, if I go into looking at those ICU expressions, again, they're going to look like exactly what it looks like on the slides, just in a code editor. But I have that plural ICU expression here, where I'm equating the plant water amount to those different variables. I also have the location where I'm applying that placement of where I actually want to place this plant with this select ICU expression. And then finally, what we had was our dollar localized, right? And so the reason I'm showing you all of these in code is I'll show you the messages file just so that we can sort of make sure we're connecting all the dots and this application localizes correctly. So if we look at our dollar localized in code, let's look at this component code. So here, again, I have my dollar localized, and I have that tagged template literal that I'm applying to this string. And so again, I haven't actually had to import anything because dollar localized is just a package that I have. So this is sort of just a tool that we're given with this package with no additional imports, because again, remember, everything that we're actually compiling to becomes this dollar localized format anyways. So we're almost just sort of skipping a step, so to speak. And I'm sure you can all think of all the powerful ways that you can sort of use this, right? Now, once we've extracted all those messages, I just want to show what that looks like. And so here we have our messages file. And so if I scroll to the top, you can see all the different messages of all the different things I've tagged with that I18N attribute and all of the different translation units. So here's that initial translation unit I talked about where it has this ID that I supplied it. So I have that custom ID. I have the string I want, and I have some nested information of interpolation. And then I have my translation. I also have a context group, so I'm actually able to know the source file and the line number that that came from, just if I want to make sure I have that reference. Again, when you think about how this scales, I think all this information, the more information, the better in creating the most accurate thing possible. We have that description and meaning. Now, let's look at an example of how the ICU expression actually translates. So remember, in that in the ICU expression, I didn't give it that description or meaning, and so you can see the alternative, right? So we've been given and generated this random ID, and again, it doesn't mean as much, right? So again, I'd always say set the ID, since this really has no meaning to me. But then I have the ICU expression, which is a nested expression. Now, the cool thing about translation is you can change nesting within the same HTML element, right? So if I want to move this ICU expression and it made sense for the water to follow in a different language. Maybe we gave a number of days that you want to water it followed by water on or something like that. I could do that because it's all within the same HTML element. Now, I couldn't do that if I wanted to change the order, right? So in our example, we have the water amount followed by the location. I can't change based on locale the nesting, so I can't move elements above or below each other, but I can change the internal nesting structure. So just like some small nuances of what localization's limitations are there. And then again, I have what that ICUI expression actually looks like with translation, where I'm translating anything in those brackets just to be what it actually means in these different languages. Let's see. And then the one last thing I want to show is, again, this manually extracted translation unit for our $localizing call, right? So I haven't set an ID, so I have this random idea, and then I just have a source and a target. So a little bit less information is coming out of that $localizing call for now, in code for now, but hopefully more to come there. And then finally, I just want to show quickly so that when I serve these, you know what I'm doing. But I have two different configurations for how I'm actually going to localize these in my angular.json, just so that I have configuration variables so I can show what it looks like. Now, I've chosen to set a base ref of what the actual locale ID is. That's pretty typical. If you actually were to deploy this, you would probably have a different URL. If you think about your favorite application you've been to, if you've ever changed language, usually you see the base ref change based on the locale, just to make sure that you're able to serve those different locations. And so with that said, let's look at what that actually looks like. So if I open the terminal, you can see that I have my compiled version. And what's compiled is just the English version. But let's say I wanted to add a configuration. And let's just do the Dutch version. So let's give it that NL flag. Then once it compiles, I can go back. I can go back to my browser and I can show you what that actually looks like. So that here, obviously my local host doesn't work anymore, but if I add that NL, which is the Dutch, I guess you can do some drum roll in place, but here we go. So we have all of those translations, right? So very cool that we're able to basically just serve that with that one configuration and see all of our translation. And again, remember the powerfulness of this is that you can serve it in these different locations locally. And when you deploy it, you're going to be able to deploy all of these distributable files, right? And then the one last thing that I haven't really talked about, but I want to show is the option to do a little bit more of this at runtime. So if I open my polyfills and close my terminal, then I can show this one extra tool we have. So something people talk a lot about is runtime I18N, and I'll talk about that. It's sort of in my wrap up because I want to define that a little bit better. But if we're talking about, or if we've heard the term runtime I18N, I do want to just show it is possible. And that's going to be using this tool called load translations that again landed with localize. So if you want to actually load your translations at a later time with polyfills, you still need to do this prior to actually starting the application, but you are able to override. So here, for example, I've loaded translations, and if I were to rebuild this, I could override the translation for that $localize in code. That's what this ID is coming from. With, let's say, a hack to say, actually, no matter what I click, my favorite plant is a cactus, or something a little bit troll-like. So with that said, again, this is sort of the way to get rid of, if you didn't want to have to create a messages file, you could just put all of your translations in polyfills. But I want to sort of talk about whether or not that's useful or sort of what the use case is there. So that said, let me just wrap up and go back to my slides. So everything we've basically been talking about up to this point is compile time. And I just want to emphasize that's the recommended approach because of all of sort of that use case, all of the reasoning I gave at the beginning, where we are looking for this zero runtime overhead solution, right? We're looking for a small compile time. We're looking for something that really cares about that end user. But something we hear a lot about is runtime I18N. And I just want to sort of break the misconception that it's not happening, right? So we do have this option. We do have the ability to do this. That being said, the advantage is that it's more flexible, but the disadvantage is we're not getting some of that built in, right? We're not able to catch errors at compile time. There could be production bugs. There's additional code size. There is a runtime cost, right? So you really have to think about whether or not that trade-off is worth it for your use case. And what people are normally talking about when they talk about runtime I18N is they're actually looking for a dynamic solution. So they're looking for a way to use translations outside of templates and change it. And that's where that $localize in code comes in. And that's sort of what I would emphasize maybe is the approach that you want to take if you're looking for a more dynamic solution. But again, you do need to still load those translations before the application starts. Polyfills aren't a hack for doing anything dynamically. If you're looking to create a Google Translate, that's more of a business use case, and you need to create APIs that actually translate things dynamically. And then the final thing that Angular likes to talk a lot about is lazy loading. So I just want to sort of shout out that lazy loading is totally possible with I18N if you're tree shaking all of your messages and you're only loading a module if it needs to be there, or if you're scrolling or navigate to that page. I18N totally goes with that. So again, lazy loading is possible. It's happening. It sort of lands again with those sort of like invisible benefits of upgrading. And with that said, we've talked a lot about the design decisions behind the first-party I18N solution, and we've also talked about why and how to implement them. So I'd encourage you to ng add localize and try it for yourself, and really create that global accessible world. And I cannot promise, and I've been told I cannot promise things to come now that I'm actually on the Angular team. But I do think that there's more documentation coming for $localize. Some of the stuff I've talked about today is definitely really exciting to users, and we know that, and we want to make sure that users are using them with best practices. As well as, again, that message extraction just landed. So clearly things are actively coming. So with that, thank you, and happy to take questions.
Well, thank you first up for the presentation. I really liked it. I was a bit blown away even with all the Dutch translations in there even. So I see there were some questions. Let me see. Give it a sec. One of the things Stefan asked us was, could you compare it with NGX Translate?
Yeah, I can. Minko, if you want to step in, maybe you have a better answer. Oh, I can't hear you, Minko.
Oh, yeah, of course. I muted myself twice because I can. Yeah, we can compare on different levels. I guess syntactically, I wouldn't be probably able to compare too well. It's like in terms of a feature set, since I haven't used NGX Translates too much. The biggest difference, in my opinion, is when the translation is happening, whether this is happening at build time or at runtime. With the built-in solution, things are happening at build time, which means that we're going to produce the fastest application possible. Since we're going to use the minimum amount of translations that you're actually using in your application, we're not going to have multiple, we're not going to have data binding instructions for each individual translation, since this is just going to be a string that exists in your application. And that's pretty much most of it. In terms of the limitation that you get with the built-in solution is that you wouldn't be able to change the language without reloading the page. And we are with the assumption that people usually don't change the language of the web app like more than once. They usually select the language, and right after that, maybe like months after that, they would want to experiment to see how the content looks in another language potentially, or maybe even not change it at all. With NGX Translate on the other side, you're getting a more dynamic approach where you can change the language dynamically without refreshing the page. So that's one of the benefits that you're getting out there. both solutions that have their pros and cons, so you can pick whichever works better for you.
Well, thank you for that. I think Sander, you had also a question. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, we don't want to interrupt this entirely awesome presentation, so we muted ourselves. I have a couple of questions. The first question is the Angular internationalization, which is indeed a tongue breaker. Is that using the internationalization out of the browser, or does it ship its own stuff?
Sorry, I guess, what do you mean by out of the browser?
The browser also have the modern browsers also have like an internationalization tool set for all the locales and the translations of the numbers and so on. Is that being used, or is something else being used inside of Angular?
If you're using any of those pipes or anything like that, you're loading, that's actually coming out of Angular. If you're talking about if I navigate to a website in Chrome, for example, it gives me the option to click translate and it'll translate that full page, right? That's going to be separate.
Yeah. Okay. And then I saw you are using this XIF format for your translation files. Why did the team pick that that format? Is there tooling or something around this format?
I believe, and Minko can jump in, but I've always seen XLF, which I'm not sure. I've always just called it XLF, but that's what is most common for translation tools. So if you actually were in a larger application or you wanted to use an actual translation service website, when you send those files to a translator, they'd be using a different tool. They wouldn't actually be editing it in a code file. And so XLF is the most common format. I'm not sure if more decisions went into how the team chose that format. And I know that there are flags. So if you wanted to specify a different format, you can totally do that. And I think every type is supported that I've seen.
Thank you.
And you got a thumbs up from Minko. That's cool.
So one of the people that's watching us is asking if you can share your presentation or where the end if you have the application as a demo, because they're pretty interested in.
Yeah, I can definitely share the slides. If you reach out to me on Twitter, or I can send them to Def Angular.
Sure.
And then
Yeah, sure.
I can also put the repo on GitHub for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bonnie, did you have any questions?
I just wanted to say that I love the plants and I love putting localize in the code. I just was really happy about that.
Yeah, I know. It's definitely, I don't know if that issue is going to get closed anytime soon, but there's a lot of great comments on the issue sort of talking about all the different use cases for why people want that. Totally makes sense. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I love it. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. And I like all the plants too.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Emma, for that's the questions basically they tell. We have a Q&A, so if people are still with us on the end of the show, then please just add them, and we'll ask Emma or Minko the questions around AIT. Wow, that's a tongue breaker again. I18N, and then Bonnie, are your slides already present on your screen?
Yeah, they're ready.
Let's go.
You want me to go? I have a little bit of a sore throat tonight, so I'm going to not spend too much time. But I just want to run you guys through a little bit. Well, actually, while I'm sharing this, I have to say hi because I have some friends in the chat tonight. And we have some really fun people in the chat. So I just want to say hi to my friends in the chat. And then there's my slides. Can you see this?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm Bonnie. I'm an Angular GDE. I'm a panelist on Angular Air, founder of NG Houston, and the founder of AngularNation.net, which is kind of new, and that's what I wanted to show you tonight. So a lot of people still don't know about it because it's new. So this is just a quick introduction to Angular Nation. So I actually came across this domain. I got this from Jeff Welpley back in 2017 because he originally had it and he was going to build something and he got busy. And so he gave it to me and I was going to build something, and I wanted to build something for the community because I just wanted a way for us all to kind of connect, because we start with the tutorials. There are a lot of Angular tutorials out there now, but then we kind of outgrow the tutorials and we need to figure out, and also, I just really wanted us to be able to collaborate and talk, but I didn't know exactly how to do that. So I spent a couple years sitting on this domain because I just thought it was cool, Angular Nation, and I didn't really know exactly what to do with it. I was thinking of like a Stack Overflow Reddit kind of thing, but I didn't want to build something that we already had. So I got stuck for a while just going, I don't know what to do with it. And then in 2019, through Yoga with Adrian, I found a platform called Mighty Networks that I loved, and it had a really nice interface and a lot of very cool features just built around communities. So I started working on that, and then we launched in 2020. Just a few months ago, we launched, and we're up to I think like 1,400 people now, and it's been fun. So, but I just want to talk about a little bit about why it's there and what it's for. So when I first started getting involved in the community and speaking at Angular conferences, most of the speakers were using Twitter, and which was perfect, right? I followed all my favorite people and I kept in touch with them between conferences. And pretty soon I had a pretty great Twitter feed that was almost entirely Angular, which was perfect for me, right? Because I loved it. And it was just a great place to keep up with the latest community events and announcements and everything like that. So for years, this has been working great for me. And I've just been, checking in with all my Angular people on Twitter. However, lately, like we've seen the warnings about harmful patterns in social media, and we've got Instagram influencers now and YouTube personalities and bots and trolls and a whole lot of political propaganda. And these algorithms that they use sometimes are intentionally divisive and harmful. And unfortunately, they're also very effective, as we've seen from Trump and Brexit. And I don't even want to talk about politics, but you get the idea. The point that I want to make is that now more than ever, social media can be harmful to our mental health. And although I had carefully cultivated my Twitter feed, right, to be all Angular all the time, that's all changed this year. And I'm an American expat and I'm living in Europe now, but I follow a lot of Americans, and there's been so much frustration with politics and coronavirus and all kinds of stuff. And no matter what country you're in, this stuff is really stressful, right? And I do care about these issues. And I think that's maybe why it's so stressful. And I want to keep up with the news, but what they used to call news is now kind of something different, right? By the way, I just threw this slide in this week because I just saw this. This is a documentary that I found on Netflix, and it's not at all related to Angular, but I think it's really important for everybody to watch this documentary. So if you have not seen that, please go check that out, The Social Dilemma, especially if you have family or teens that are using social media. Anyway, so we used to call it social networking, and then somewhere along the way it changed to social media, which is really actually something completely different because we don't really have control anymore of what we're looking at of our feed or our timeline, right? Someone else is driving that now and deciding what to put in front of us. And we've known for a while that social media is harmful, but we still need a way to connect with other people. And even now more than ever, we need a way to connect with other people, right? So this is what I've been kind of looking for. I've been speaking at Angular conferences for several years, and I love these crazy people. And the reason why I love this community and the GDE program specifically is because these people are just super nice and humble, and they're all a bunch of nerds, right? So if we're in the hallway talking at a conference, we just stand around talking about code, and we love it, and I love that. And I miss that, right? I want to have that camaraderie that we used to have in the hallway track at the conferences. And so that's really what I wanted to kind of find a way to have that online, and not just to have, the YouTube talks or meetups or anything, but like to have, like, how do we actually keep in touch with each other, and how do we find people that are working on what we're working on? Anyway, so this Mighty Networks interface, I really love this. People can come and just post whatever they want to share. This is free, by the way. And people can come. It's meant for people to come and ask questions about Angular, and also just to share, something that you found that you thought was helpful about Angular. There are some really good discussions, and it's kind of an interface like Twitter or Facebook. But what I like about this is it's actually every post has a topic. And because this is the thing about Twitter, like I've found so many great resources on Twitter, but it's really hard to go back later and find that. If I want to find like an article that I saw a couple months ago, I can't find it, right? So this has tags, and it just makes it super easy to go back and find things that we're looking for later. And also we have, so we have topics. I think we have like 20 or 30 topics now. CLI schematics, we have elements, material. We have a lot of people talking about state management, Scully, RxJS. We have some of the authors and core team members like Sonder directly answering questions. So that's really super cool. We also have channels, which are kind of like breakout rooms, right? So they're just smaller. We have Angular in Hindu, Angular in Chinese. We have Angular in Italian, which is a very active channel. We have a lot of Italians that are really cool. And then we also have a lot of meetup groups. So these channels are all free to join, and they're just like whatever your interests are. So you can go and look at all the topics, look at all the channels, and just kind of find what you're looking for in there. One thing that I was kind of surprised about was because we had 1,000 people join in the first week, and I was super shocked about that. I was not prepared, and I asked them a lot of questions because I just kind of wanted to get to know everybody better. And one of the questions was, how well do you feel you know Angular? Because I kind of really wanted beginners to feel welcome here and be able to ask questions. But what I found was a lot of these people actually were not beginners. A lot of these people were, senior developers and architects that were coming into Angular Nation. And so my daughter and I were working on a beginner's course, and we pivoted and we launched Angular Architect training. So everything here is free, but Angular Architect is just the premium course that we have on there. We run this a couple hours a week. We're working with small groups of developers, and we have office hours. They come in. There's a picture of Mikkel, who I saw in the chat. So you can ask him what he thought, because he was part of our group last month, and it was a lot of fun. So we're doing another group this month, and we do every month we do architect training. Also, we have Baker's Dozen Scholarship, because this is one last thing that I just wanted to throw in there, because I think this course is a great value, but in some parts of the world, currency makes anything like this prohibitively expensive, right? So we do notice a problem with diversity in tech, and we see it. We want to help. So the Baker's Dozen just means for every 12 students that come into the course, we have one free ticket that we give away. So if you're interested in that, go check it out or ask me, and I can help you sign up for that scholarship so that you can get some free training. And otherwise, just go check out Angular Nation. I just wanted you guys to know that it was there. And again, it's completely free. So all you need is an email address, and it's there. So go check it out. I'm there, and I'll see you there. And that's my talk.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I've been around Angular Nation, I think, from the beginning. Yeah, I think.
I meant to mention that Jeffrey's actually on our core team. So when you go and put your email address and you want to join, then those are just those invitations are just approved like over and over and over again. And Jeffrey's one of the people that's helping us, and he helps us with the code of conduct, which we haven't had any issues. But Jeffrey's been there like since we launched, and he's amazing.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the top rating in inviting everybody and getting everybody in there.
I know. Him and Sam, we had a lot of people jumping in when we first launched, and then him and Sam were like fighting over the button, because like they would get a notification, they would go to approve all the requests, and then Jeffrey got them all, or Sam. They're very competitive, those two. It's fun.
Yeah, it's really fun, and I've been there on your course. It's really interesting. I like the office hours that are there to just start the conversation with people you never met, basically. I remember a time where it was Massour or something from France. He had really good questions. We had a really good discussion about how to set up Angular and how to use it with enterprise applications, that kind of stuff. So it's really good to be there.
Somebody told me once, if you want to help someone, rather than telling them what they need, ask them what they need. And so what we do is, and I've been consulting for years, right? And I love Angular. Like I'm a huge fan of Angular, and I mean, not to get mushy or anything, right? But I just really love Angular. But I've seen some people that have been implementing it in the wrong way. And the problem that I always find is when you pile more and more and more, like you can get away with a lot with Angular, right? You can write some bad stuff and it still all works and it works great. But then when it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the more you write, it just gets slower and slower. And then it's like, oh, wow. And so you kind of learn sometimes backwards. Anyway, so I took all this stuff that I learned from years of consulting and doing lots of enterprise Angular stuff, and I put it into this course. But so we do like an hour a week where I'm teaching everybody, all the things, the big mistakes that I've seen a lot of people make. And I see a lot of people making the same mistakes from one team to the next, right? So I address that. But then really, I think the most fun is we do that. And then we also have 2 hours a week of office hours where people come in and then I can say, what do you want to know? Like, what are you working on? What questions do you have? And I think that's been a lot of fun. So yeah, so that's there and it's available. It's a lot of fun. Do we have time for questions? Because I actually have a question. I know we probably have more questions.
Sure.
But I have a question for Minko.
We have questions.
Is that allowed?
Yeah, it's good. You're all good.
Okay, so we were talking. I might have asked this question actually a couple months ago, but it's because I get to ask. I see you every couple months, Minko, so I get to ask you for updates. So we were talking about. We were actually talking about this in our architect office hours today. We were talking about Ivy and manual change detection, and I'm trying to figure out how because I had talked to Stephen like maybe a year ago in London about manual change detection in Ivy and how if you're letting go of Zone.js, like we really want developers at some point to write. So what would you say to developers about like writing their own manual change detection? Where are we at with that?
You can do that right now. Zone.js is still optional. What we mean with zoneless Angular applications is to, well, we were kind of not even sure what we mean by this just yet. Everyone from the team has a slightly different perspective, but generally, everything that we have shared in the issue itself, you can achieve today just by making Zone.js to be a no operation and running detect changes of the change detector ref. What we are thinking, I'm going to share my perspective, which might turn out to be incorrect, like inaccurate in the future. What we're thinking is enabling more advanced change detection models, for example, where you'll be able to run change detection in only particular parts of your application, again, like triggering it manually, and also reconsidering the component level state management. This sounds like super abstract, and I'm intentionally like keeping it that abstract because things will very likely be much different compared to what I'm imagining right now.
And this is what I was kind of struggling with this too, because we were talking about that and people are asking me like, how is this going to work? But the thing is, because there's more than one way that it could be done that would be proper, right? So that's really, I think, where the struggle comes in with how to approach it, because there's more than one right answer. So then which right answer because whichever right answer you pick, somebody's going to tell you that that's not the right answer that they wanted. So what do you do? So is that kind of where we're at? Like there's more than one way to approach it?
Yeah, there are thousands of ways to approach it, and we'll be considering the main alternatives in the next couple of quarters. This is still going to be like a really large project, and what we have on the roadmap is just investigating on what are like the different ways we can approach this problem. So I'm not expecting us to release anything like groundbreaking in the next year or so. There are going to be a lot of incremental changes in other directions, but regarding zoneless, things are going to be moving slower because this is going to have really large impact on the entire, on Angular. And we want to make it in a way that it's not like breaking at all, and also is the most scalable and alternative with the best developer ergonomics. So this is something that we're going to gradually actually show to folks. The chances are that we're going to run an RFC when we start making like more advanced, when we go into a more advanced stage of planning, so that everyone would be able to join the design process. So things are going to roll out.
So in the meantime, they should go ahead and start kind of checking that out and see how it's working for them, and maybe come back to the Angular team with updates, because it seems like if there's early adopters who are kind of checking this stuff out, then that's really what the Angular team wants to see. Like, let us know, right?
Yeah. There is actually nothing to check out yet. We are not even in planning stage yet for this project. So you can think about different ways you want your application to execute change detection. You can think about what are your biggest struggles right now with Zone.js. Just pretty much having your list of issues, like top problems that you experience with change detection and Zone.js, and being able to share them once we start the RFC process. Whenever this happens, it could be like a year or 2 years from now. Just having this ready, this is going to be super valuable for us.
Awesome.
Okay. Am I hearing correctly that we are going to make changes to change detection itself too, or is it just Zone.js that is optional? Zone.js and change detection are different things.
Well, the changes in the change detection could be in the way we trigger it. So that's what optional zones are going to be primarily around. And from there might be some implications on the way we manage states inside of components, for example. But this is very up in the air. I'm just kind of making things up right now.
Live on YouTube.
So I think I saw a question around I18N. Let me double check it. Let me pick it. I can share it on screen probably. Let me see. Is there any chance that once we get the ability to extract translations to get text?
Yeah, I think I can answer this. My understanding of get text is that it is sort of another package just like that NGX translate or all of the other great third-party solutions. So I don't think that I'm not sure if the package maintainers still have the ability to do that. I know it was definitely a larger solution during AngularJS. But I don't believe that we would have a solution within the first party solution to be able to use get text. You would have to add that package.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. I think it will answer his question. And I think there was another one. Let me double check. Yeah, it's here. Oh, wait. Just clicking the wrong buttons. Does localize work based on the browser locale?
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about a little bit. So when I injected that locale ID as an import, that is getting it from the browser. So if you wanted to use the locale ID of your browser, that's how it would be doing it. So you can use that flag. If you wanted to serve your application based on that, when you deploy, you would need to make the decision to do that based on that locale ID and hope, you would need to make sure that your application is localized in whatever locale the browser is being rendered in. So I could see an edge case there, but yeah, that's where that's coming from. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Maybe Shimon, if he's still with us, then he can comment in the chat if it did answer his question. So basically, I got a question more like related to community and contribution. I recently started working on the Angular CLI. I started small, basically, and I was wondering how we could improve, or what I can do to improve the community to assist more with the contributions to the Angular CLI, for example. I think this morning, Minko, you even merged one of my PRs that was there by coincidence, and I really liked it. So I'm looking like, how can we attract more people there? Are there any guidelines? Are there any steps that people can take? And Emma, if you know the answer, that's also fine by me.
I can talk about this one.
Sure.
I can talk about this one. My audio is a little bit cutting out as well, so let me know if you stop. Well, there is no way for you to let me know if you stop hearing me. But anyway, so there are different ways to approach things. I think you're actually contributing a lot to the Angular community just by hosting this meetup. That's a fantastic initiative. So something that I used to do while I was before I joined the team was to look for reported issues that are with label community hot list. So the community hot list issues are usually a good start for someone who would want to contribute externally to the framework. We have some larger efforts, like for example, zone list. This is going to be really hard to achieve from someone who's outside of the team, since this is a really large project and this involves collaboration with many different teams. But there are a lot of issues that we have opened, which are excellent start for folks who are contributing externally. Oops, I think. Oh, you still hear me? Okay, because I stopped hearing like the tone room from someone. I can share a PR that I did yesterday, which is actually which was going to be an excellent candidate for a community contribution. So
Yeah, sure.
it was just a README file where I updated beta to next. These contributions are actually super highly valued, since they're making the entire project much very polished and fixing and generally show involvement to the people and excitement about the product itself. But I'll say that contributions with source code, they're just part of the story. I really enjoyed, for example, hosting meetups, and I'm still hosting Angular San Francisco and partially Angular Mountain View right now online. Writing content that's super valuable, since unfortunately in the documentation we cannot cover every possible use case that people can be using Angular, and there are some edge cases which are very, very niche and very specific, and covering such content in a blog post is fantastic. So contribution to the repository and to the source code are just part of the story.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. I think I started with that, just changing the README on the Angular CLI, because there was some outdated what was it, testing. I think the unit test did change from the dev kit admin tooling that was there or something like that, and changed to Bazel basically. So I would highly recommend the people to just try it, and the guys at least from the Angular CLI and the other people as well are just helpful with comments and will help you with the changes you need to do. So go check it out, and the community flag, that's the one we're looking for basically.
I was very proud. How did you feel? Did you walk a little taller after you're a legit, my code's been merged into the Angular repo?
Yeah, I did.
Were you kind of full of yourself?
I was running around in the backyard screaming, I did it.
I can imagine your wife going, all right, Jeffrey, that's enough. I know.
It was a lot of fun.
I don't blame you. It's an exciting moment.
Yeah, I threw a party when my first PR to AngularJS was merged.
Yeah. And Mikkel, too, had one merged in. All these Dutch guys getting famous.
Yeah. So I think there are not any other questions from the community at this moment. I don't know. So do you still have some questions?
Well, I do have a question that is related to the CLI. I would love to see something where during development, to begin with, we would be using only ESM modules without bundling, so we can use hot module reloading and iterate very quickly, because you barely need to compile anything in that case. Is the CLI team looking into that?
Well, you'd still need to compile things, since Angular's templating language needs to be compiled down to TypeScript, and from there we need to down level the TypeScript source code to JavaScript. Also, keep in mind that with ECMAScript modules, the browser needs to send an HTTP request for every module out there, which may lead to slower page reloads. This is not something that we're looking at right now.
That's too bad.
At the same time, though, Alan made opting into hot module reloading easier last week. So this must be somewhere on the changelog from yesterday. So I would recommend you looking at it. And and if it doesn't solve your problem, you can always open a feature request in the Angular CLI, and it is going to be considered by the team.
I usually just talk to people like you and nag until it's done.
Okay, well, I think Bonnie, you don't have any questions yet.
I'm
Then
just
we can,
laughing at
wrap it
Summer's
up.
nag because I've seen it, and he's very charming. He always gets what he wants with this nagging.
It always works.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for the Q&A and the talk, Emma. I really appreciate everything. Would love to see the slides later, but we'll communicate about that. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see each other soon. Bye bye.